I do have an MFA, so you can just call me Kate. It's okay.
Sorry.
I feel like I spent a lot of time in a university setting being like, it's not a doctor. It's very nice to be here. Just because I like to know my audience. Have I taught any of you already? I know you. That's it? Okay, great. I also teach intro to theater over in the theater department, so I get to meet a lot of folks who are not in my department, so good. It's nice to see you again. Today I would like to talk about playing pretend, which it is true. I have spent much of my life, when I decided that theater was the direction I wanted to go, playing pretend. It's literally what we do. We come up with a world and some characters, and we just try to live in it and see what happens. But through that, there's a lot of things that I think we start to understand as theater practitioners about the world around us, and that didn't start because I picked up a script. That started way before that. So let's take a little journey, shall we? So that's me, probably at 5. And I put here bathroom mirror star because I would like to share a story with you that I remember, but I then remember later when it was told back to me, and like it kind of clicked in a way that like a grown-up can see a thing that maybe a kid can't. I remember being in my mother's bathroom when I was probably 5 or 6, and we had a babysitter. And my mom's bathroom, the way it was organized, you could sort of climb up on a stool or something that was in the bathroom, and it had a great mirror that you could you could center yourself in. However tall I was when I was 5 or 6 years old, like being able to see myself in the mirror, I don't know, it felt like all of a sudden I was like performing. And I happened to be obsessed at the moment with news reports. I think I grew up in a time when like people were watching the news. And so I don't know for how long, but apparently I would crawl up in front of the mirror and I would then report the news, whatever that happened to be. But I was Katie Johnson for the news, and I had all kinds of stories, and I would then tell my audience, my television audience, in the mirror. And this particular time, I left, I guess my half-hour spiel was done, and I left the bathroom to find my babysitter just sitting on the bed outside the bathroom, just stunned. I had no idea I had an audience. But she sat and just was, I have no idea. She might have caught the whole act. I don't know. But I had an audience, and she just I remember like sort of her looking at me, and I remember being like, I had to do the news, and then like going to do something else. But I remember feeling caught, right? And I think afterwards she told my mom, and that's how it came up later. My mom was sharing with me this, she said, and I remember that Kim, your babysitter, was so shocked to find that you spent like a really long time standing in front of the mirror pretending that you were a news reporter. And I'm sure the things I'm reporting on were not in any way factual. I'm sure they were about my day-to-day, about my sister, about my mom, about my school, whatever the thing was. But like I, in my mind, had created this whole thing. So where I did it, I could see myself as I was doing it, and that felt important too. And so I was Kate Goodwin, bathroom reporter, or Kate Johnson at the time. That was my name then. And I remember, in that way that you can when you're like when you were young, I remember that was a thing I would do, and that's just one of many things. I love to dress up. So this is me in my cowgirl phase era, and this is me. We did a back to school. This is back to school fever. Me and my friend Ashlyn Brooks, who lived down the street, we would dress up, but this in particular, and I actually can't believe my mom let me wear this, because this is, when I went back and found this picture, I was like, that's a little risque, to be entirely honest, for me. But we did a whole concert on the back porch where we compelled our neighbors to come and watch us while we lip synced to Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and what's the Beach Boys song that's something in the USA? Surfing in, yes. So we did a backstage, we did a back porch concert like this, and we planned it, right? We picked out costumes, and we worked on our material, and we invited everybody, we got an audience, and then there we were rock stars. We were, not rock stars, but we were, stars performing for our audience. I loved to dress up, which kind of plays into that whole idea of pretending, right? I'm putting on something to get me in character. So there were lots of things that I pretended, but I'm actually curious. I'm going to pause for a second because I want to know, when you were a kid, what were some of the things that you pretended? Yeah.
I was the weird kid that would crawl around on all fours,
Uh-huh.
and I was a dog, I
Yeah.
was a cat, I was a dragon.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the time.
Any other former dogs, cats, and dragons in here? Yes. Okay, you are not alone. Yes. What else? Yes.
I'm a big Marvel and DC fan.
Yeah.
I was always a superhero.
Yes. Anybody else have their superhero phase? Yes. Did it come with costumes? Costumes? Yes. Did you make them or did you buy them?
Both.
Both. Okay. Great. If you could find somebody to spend the money on them, yes. But if not, then I will figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay. What else do we pretend? Yeah.
My mom read us like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, like
Yeah.
when we were young.
Yeah.
So my brother and I would spend like honestly probably an hour talking about, oh, we're gonna be like this person, this, and we would go all into the details, and then we get like 5 minutes of playing the pretend of
But
whatever.
The planning of
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah.
And really
Very
specific.
Tolkien-esque.
Great. I love that. Yes. Yeah.
For me and my friends, it was always like fairies and vampires, werewolves, all that.
And what was your context for fairies, vampires, and werewolves? Had you seen them or read them or just like?
Like, I think it was just like a popular trope, like as a kid, like Twilight and like
Oh, yeah, okay.
Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
I think that had a big influence, and we'd be playing outside usually.
Did you always play the same character or did you switch it up?
It would mostly be the same character.
Okay. Like in it, you're like, I'm always the fairy and you're always the werewolf and you are the vampire.
like we probably switch it up time to time, but like we had our favorites.
Okay. And were you characters that like went on a variety of adventures or was it the same story every time that you played out?
I think it was a variety.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Superheroes, was it always the same battle that you were fighting or did like that was just the character and then we're going to see what we did
I
today?
switched up characters.
And not the same character.
Yeah,
Okay.
with my friends, when we became, our thing was like with whichever book series we were obsessed with.
yeah.
So Wings of Fire is like dragons
Right,
and
right,
stuff.
right. I'm familiar.
Obsessed. So we had our little, like we were each like the same character and we had like different storylines and stuff that we would make up and go on and all these like mythical whatevers. But yeah, we would be our own little characters that
Okay.
we made up and go on different adventures.
I love that. Okay. Yes, here and then here and then here. Okay.
For me it was, I know dragons, I was very obsessed with How to Train Your Dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which resulted in me wanting to ride dragons or look for dragons, which usually equated to jumping off the bed, jumping from a place I shouldn't jump,
Great.
or usually just doing something clumsy trying to find a dragon.
Okay. Yes.
But it was fun.
Yes. So location was important.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
A lot of my play included like real world as well. We pretended to be cooks because there was a tree we had,
Yes.
and the dip of the tree was perfect for you to like gather leaves, berries, and all sorts of things to like mix it all.
Yes. Any other backyard chefs? Yes. There were several backyard chefs. Were you always experimenting with recipes? Same ingredients?
Always experimenting, whatever we found, acorns, making stuff for squirrels.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
We would play, you know the movie Halloween Town?
Let's say that I do.
Yeah, sure. We would play Halloween Town. Like,
Okay.
We just adapted a movie into the characters.
Okay. So the storyline was like, did you stick to the storyline?
No.
Okay,
It was
but
just
like
characters.
the characters, and then you're like, and here we go, and
It
that.
was very outside, lots of exploring and just creating your own little land and conquering. You know.
Okay, I love that. Okay, I love that you're all over your hand. I promise. Okay. Yes, and then yes, and then yes, and then yes.
So I grew up big Star Wars fan,
Yes.
and I grew up during the Clone Wars show,
I like
which was
that.
peak Star
I grew up
Wars,
during the
peak
Clone
Star
Wars,
Wars, before Disney ruined it, and then I would always just be a Jedi.
Okay.
Like I would get a lightsaber, whether it be like an actual toy prop lightsaber, or I would just get a pen, and just be a Jedi. And if I was with because I have a few friends that are all Star Wars fans, we would duel. We would simulate Force, using the Force.
That.
So
That's
so
a lot
much
of
fun.
cooperation. Yeah.
Peak Star Wars.
Yeah. So like if someone was using the force on you, you knew you had to jump back.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Okay. Like so that was the
Always.
agreement. Okay.
That
great,
is
'cause
how
the
it
force
works.
is strong. Yes.
I would dress up as a princess. I had a little dress from every Disney princess.
Yeah.
I was a big Disney
Any
princess.
princesses in the room?
And I would also emulate like things my parents did, like we would pretend to take care of kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anybody else like baby dolls and all of them? They all got fed and they all got okay. Yeah. Yes.
I did a lot of the floor is lava with my brother.
Yeah.
But we would specifically do it at Harris Teeter. And so, because at the time they were all 24 hours, and my mom would get off work at like 11, and then
Okay.
she'd grab us kids from our grandma's house because she was a single mom.
Sure.
We were super poor.
Sure.
So she'd get off from her, 18-hour shift, and she'd pick us up, and we'd go grocery shopping at Harris Teeter at like
Yeah.
11:30 at night, and we'd get our free cookie and our free balloon, and then because the store's pretty empty, then we would play, because they had the diamond-shaped floors, and so they had the big white squares, and the big
Got
black
it.
squares, and then the little red squares, and then, so you'd have to be on the red ones.
Yeah.
And so my brother and I would just do shenanigans, slowly following our
Mm-hmm.
mom throughout the store.
Yes, I have a son who likes to play the I can see you but you can't see me game in the store, which is fine until you have to go. So
Worse than
essentially,
Macy's.
he loves to do it in World Market. That's where I'm losing him. That's right.
It's a lot of laughs.
Yes. I'm not saying I condone it. I'm just saying, have I stood at the front of the store and said, Jack Goodwin? Now, I have. And at that point, the parents in the room, honestly, are usually like, he's over here. There's a group of us. Okay, good. All right. I'm not alone in my pretend. Oops, wrong way. Everybody's seen me do that. Okay. So let's talk about what happens, actually, when we play pretend, all right? What is it that we are experiencing? What is it that we are buying into when we play pretend? I've got a few things, and I don't want to say this is not an exhaustive list, all right? But as I was thinking through it, these were the things that felt like were most true for me. And as a person who now has children who are definitely like in various stages of playing pretend, and sadly my daughter is now a 9th grader, so unfortunately we are sort of moving in a different way when we talk about pretend. Not that there's still not pretend when you're a teenager. There's lots of pretend, but in a different way. Okay, so this first one feels very true to me because I'm also a theater person, and it's actually a theater term, but I'm going to use it just to encapsulate this whole idea of pretend. And that is that when we play pretend, we are going to assume given circumstances. As a theater person, given circumstances is very much a term that we talk about all the time. And I'm actually going to point to this. So it's a theater term that we credit to Konstantin Stanislavski. He would have said it in Russian, but that is the translation. And he is really credited with reinventing what we know of as realistic acting. He's the guy with Moscow Art Theater and a playwright named Anton Chekhov. Together, they were writing kind of new theater. This would have been in the late 1800s. And up until that time, performance, not that we didn't have plays, we had great plays, but the acting style was very what we might call presentational, right? It was the idea that the audience is the most important part, and so I want them to hear all of my voice and see all of my face. So we're going to stand this way, even if who I was talking to was over here. It was very presentational. And he was sort of the person who turned that on its head and said, really, the most effective way to communicate to an audience is really to understand, to have the actors be as realistic as possible, and we don't talk to each other in dialogue but not facing one another. So the idea being that actors have work to do, that they have to figure out as intricately as they can who they are, where they are, why they're there, and what is the world that they're living in, because we want to see them as accurately as possible exist in that world while they're performing a play. So this idea of like realistic acting. We would all be very shocked if we were sitting in a play 300 years ago. It would be very strange to us because it would not in any way be realistic. This is kind of where that happened. And so this term, given circumstances, comes up because we've got some work to do as performers and designers and directors if we're going to present something realistic. So given circumstances just means the specific details and situations surrounding a character or a scene, including their background, their relationships, beliefs, desires, motivations. The list can go on, but for our purposes today, thinking about how we pretend to be something, and you all have either shared with me that you have pretended to be something, or you are thinking in your head, oh, there is that time that I used to also do this, right? Part of what we do when we decide to play pretend is that we have to create the world that we are living in, right? And who we are, and why we're going to do the thing, and what are we going to do today, and who are the people who are with us? Who are these relationships? So this picture is young Kate Johnson with her sister Cecilia. And this is a bicycle that my grandmother bought I have an aunt who was special needs, and they bought that bicycle for her to do some exercise. And every time we would go visit, we loved it. Now, what you can't see is that this driveway was pretty long, and it connected to Doc McCollum's house, who lived right next door to it. And we were allowed to drive in his driveway and my grandmother's driveway. And this tree right here was giant, but it was one of those trees that, like, the branches went to the ground, but there was lots of open space, like, underneath it. Perfect. Right? It's the best house / fort / whatever it is that you needed to, right? And nobody could really see you, and you felt like you were in your own little world, as it were. And so, much like my friend, the chef, this was our favorite game. We had created this world where our task, we were going shopping because we were cooking dinner. And we had all of these places that we would stop, and I'd help my sister, because she's still pretty young at this point, I'd help her get out. And we would go and we would collect the leaves, and we would collect the twigs, and we would collect the acorns, and we would get some dirt, and we'd get some moss, and all the things that we could find. And then we would all go back to the house where the kitchen was, where my grandmother had let us have all these bowls that we could go out and play, and some spoons that she didn't care about. And they were all under this tree. And then we would like go into the kitchen, and inevitably we'd go and sneak some water because we weren't supposed to make mud, but we did anyway, because what's the point if you can't make it muddy? And we would go under there and we would spend hours, right? So my sister and I essentially had given ourselves some circumstances, right? And usually our relationship one to another, because we were sisters, we kind of, at that point I wasn't really interested in playing like mother or like kid with my sister. So we were just sisters, and we lived together in this house, right? And our job for the day, our circumstances were, we were tasked with going shopping and then bringing them out and then making dinner, right? And sometimes I would try to get her to eat it because I'm still the big sister, and sometimes she did, and so, because she's the little sister, and that's how that goes. But this idea that when we play pretend, we are giving ourselves circumstances, right? And we're sort of, we're trying it out. What would it be like if I were a superhero? What would it be like if I were a dog? Like, what is that perspective, being on all fours and crawling around, right? What would it be like if I were a teacher? What would it be like if I were a chef? What would it be like if I were any of these things? A Jedi, right? Just on a side note, I'm very curious. Those of you who played pretend where there were good and bad, like, did you have somebody who was also on the dark side?
Of course.
Okay. Did they always choose that, or do you guys have to like rock, scissors? Or?
It depends on how many of us there were and what, I guess, like what episode just came out from the show.
All right.
Like what we were thinking at the time.
Right.
Yeah,
But
with
we
my
go back and
friends.
Yes.
Yeah, with my friends, we were always like the good ones, and like the evil dragons were kind of like, you know, invisible make believe.
Okay, so you didn't ascribe anybody to be the evil ones.
Yeah.
Anybody in here just like, nope,
I was the evil one.
You were? Okay, I was like, where are my villains?
Yeah. I
Yes.
was always the Sith. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right, because they were
Because
powerful.
I had the cool red lightsaber.
It's red.
Yeah,
And
it
they
depends
were
on whose
black.
lightsaber you
And
get.
Because red. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to unpack all of that, but I do think it's interesting that like some people are like, I am always the good person, or in my life, I sort of go this way, but when I was playing, sometimes I was the heavy, or sometimes I was the mean person, or sometimes I was because like, sometimes it's interesting to step into some of those roles. Maybe not in real life, but honestly, part of what pretend does for us is it lets us step into roles that are not our own, right? We can assume circumstances that are not the ones that we live in. We can assume we are older, younger, richer. We can assume that we have power. We can assume that we live some other place. We can assume all kinds of things because it all exists in our head. And there's nothing that's telling us that we can't, right? Which is incredibly freeing, right? And fun. And you know what? If you get so far and you're like, okay, I think we've come to the end of that. Let's play something else. And then it all goes away, right? Boom. All decisions that you've made, they've gone somewhere else, and then we can go on a new journey, right? So it's just making up a series of circumstances for us. All right. Something else that happens when we play pretend is that we get to try out language and dialogue. And I look at this a lot with and watching my little kids when they were littler do this. Watching them talk to one another as if they were something they are not. If you ever want to be humbled, just eavesdrop on your children where they're playing mommy and daddy, and they say the things that you say to them, and you're like, oh gosh, do I sound like that? Maybe I should think about rephrasing that. But what are they doing right? When they create a world where they're going to assume something that is older than them, or just an experience that they haven't had yet, they're going to try out the language. They're going to try out the words. I've never been a news reporter, but I could fill 30 minutes of news just telling you all the things that happened that day. I was using the language, I was trying it out, I was working in it. When we are in our imagined worlds and imagined characters, we get to practice what we would say and how we would say it. This is little Katie Johnson at a tea party with her neighbors, Catherine and Kim Tabot, who lived across the street in the cul-de-sac. And we would get dressed up and we would have tea parties. And I don't know if tea parties were part of your world, but for whatever reason, my mom thought it was like we had a tea set. And it was fragile. It was delicate. And I'm not very old here. But it was the kind of thing that when you set it out, like my world that had been full of plastic, right? Like little kid dishes, and all of a sudden you give me a tea set. Well, now I just got older just in doing that, right? And then our conversation changes. What do you talk about at a tea party? I don't know, but we certainly figured it out, right? We talked about Miss So-and-so, and we talked about what a lovely day it was. And are you going to the park? And isn't that a nice hat? These are not things that I would say to my friends in when we were climbing trees, but we went to a tea party, and all of a sudden we were different people, and we talked about different things because we had different circumstances. So in this, we often get to try out language. This kind of bleeds into another thought, but I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest daughter. I'm the oldest child of my mother and father. I'm the oldest grandchild of my family. My husband is the youngest and like the baby, and you can tell. It's funny. Sometimes I'll be like, well, you know how this goes, and he was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, wouldn't it be nice to be the. But I am the oldest, and part of my job sometimes was to make sure that the cousins did what I wanted them to do, right? And so when you're 9 and your 7-year-old cousin and your 6-year-old cousin and your 5-year-old sister, right, and you have the plan, because I'm the oldest, I have the plan, and I need for them to do what I want them to do, I have to practice some language skills. I've got to practice some persuasion, right, because you could threaten them. I am taller than them. I could beat them up. But then you know what happens? Then we don't play, right? Like, that's not fun. Like, yes, I could exert my brute strength. But what is better is if I work on my language and I figure out ways of persuasion. And what I want us to do is really the most fun option out there. So don't y'all want to do it with me? It allowed me in these moments of like figuring out what we were going to do, what direction we were going to go, what part of the story we were going to turn into. It allowed me to figure out how to communicate, how to get people on my side, which we do a lot. If you spend any time observing, or this maybe you're like, oh yeah, I had that cousin too, but you were just like, I follow them anywhere they go. How did that work exactly? Did they threaten you? Probably not. They may have promised you candy at the end. That sometimes is the way to go. But just that idea that we can practice language, that we can practice talking to one another when we're playing pretend. When we have assumed these characters that are not us, there's a little safety in that, right? I'm not Kate who's persuading you to do this thing or encouraging this thing. I'm your chef for the day. I am your puppy. Oh, that felt weird, but I am a Jedi. Whatever the thing is, I can persuade you by using language. All right, which leads me into this one really, is that when we play pretend, it is actually helping us navigate relationships and power structures. So this little gaggle of girls right here, these were my friends who lived in and around me. Clearly we were in dress-up mode again. Hats were a big deal. There's my little sister just always peeking through. I'm so glad my mother took these pictures. But this was our gaggle of friends. She's the oldest one. Kim is the oldest. Her younger sister is Catherine. That's Catherine. As the oldest in this particular group, Kim was the one who basically was our leader. Like, we were going to do what Kim said because she was 2 years older than us. And it wouldn't be long until she decided actually that we were too young to play with her anyway. But for right now, she had this sway over us because she was a little bit older, and we just thought she knew everything and she had the best ideas. In the sort of worlds that we created, one of the things that we end up doing often is like assuming roles, trying some things out, and that often has to do with like, are you a leader or a follower? Are you a position of power or not? We play grown-ups and children. That happens a lot. Anybody here ever been pulled into a game of school?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right? That's one of the first, like, sort of, I don't know, like, we're all there, there's somebody in front, we have tasks to do as people who are watching, and then when we get home, we're like, I want to try that. I want to be up in front. I want to tell other people what to do, right? When we played school, that's the teacher, right? Kim was the teacher every time, and we were her students. And then at some point, Kim stopped wanting to play with us. And guess who wanted to be the teacher? That'd be me. And it helped that Celia had gotten a little older, so she could sort of fill in the gaps, so we still had the right number of people. But like to be able to try out, like, hey, I wanna see if I can get you all to sit still. Can I get you all to write your ABCs? Can I lead you in a single file line out to the playground in the back, right? Because these are things that teachers did, and that's what I wanted to see if I could do too. The idea of like playing grown-ups, right? Like, I will now prepare dinner. I will, fight this idea that like I have strength where there are other people who don't. And that sort of natural leadership kind of percolates to the top in this too. The other thing that happens, and this happened with my cousins a lot, we would form alliances because you get in a group and you're like, yes, but now all of a sudden we don't all want the same thing and I'm with you. And they're over there. And now all of a sudden we've sort of divided and now we've got to like strategize against each other. That happens in pretend all the time, right? So in these worlds that we create, we're having an opportunity to figure out what kinds of relationships we can have, assume these sort of power structures that maybe we have not experienced yet because we're little kids. And then also like decide if there are people we can't trust, right? Like you may come over with this piece of information, but I think you're lying to me so that you can get into the place where the candy is or whatever the thing is. This is something else that we get to sort of play around with when we get to pretend, this idea of relationships and power structures. And then these are my two little ones. They are not this little anymore. She's in 9th grade. This is Jack and Lucy. Jack is wearing his sister's boots. Lucy is in a dance costume, I don't know, from the year before or whatever. Playing pretend and dress up in particular, like that's just a thing that we do in my family, I guess. One of the other things that happens when we play pretend is that we think critically and we collaborate. So within imagined worlds, we have to figure stuff out. We have to come up with plans, right? All right, so if we're going to build a fort, all right, we've built some forts in our lives, right? If we're going to build a fort, what are the materials that we need? Who's going to get them? Who's going to sneak into that other room that we're not supposed to go in and get that thing that we're not really supposed to have, but God, it's perfect, right? Like, don't get that pillow. That's
all
mom's
the chip clips.
That's right, yes. Go take all the chip clips off the chip bags and bring them so that we can make our fort, right? That's mom's favorite blanket. Nobody will know. Go get it because it's the biggest one and it will make our fort awesome. Like there's strategy in this, right? We're having to think about what the things are that we need. We're having to like figure out how we're going to put it together, who's in charge of getting it, right? We're thinking through details. And then we got to like do it together. Building a fort requires all hands on deck because we got to hold the thing out, the blanket out, and then we got to get the things underneath that are going to stand it up, right? And then we got to anchor it. And it's really hard to build a good fort by yourself, right? So you have to collaborate. You have to think critically. What are you going to need? And that's fort building is one of my favorite things that until I discovered that like what all the stuff that the kids have put under the blankets and then we have to put it all back, and that's not my favorite. Putting the fort back is terrible. This other thought about listening to other ideas and deciding which, and maybe just parts, to choose. If you've got a group of people and you're all imagining this world, right, and you've got this thing that you want to do, this task, a bunch of people are going to make suggestions. And part of what you do is you listen to one another, and you could go with the person who shouts loudest, or the person who's the biggest, because they're the oldest and probably their idea is the best, or not, right? Or sometimes you listen to each other and you're like, oh wait, that is a good idea. Let's go with that one. And just as a group deciding what the best idea is, that is very often part of playing pretend, particularly when you're with other people. Obviously, if you're playing pretend by yourself, you have all the ideas and then you can choose which one you think is going to work. But as a group, it's a great time for us to practice this idea of sharing, of persuading, and for us to choose what the thing is that we feel like is the strongest idea. All right. So I'm going to throw this pyramid up here because it means a lot to me as a person who teaches theater. But this is a learning pyramid, and here's a good quote by Aristotle. For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them, right? Practicing a thing is important if we're going to have to actually do the thing. And the learning pyramid is just this idea of after 10 days, how much of a thing will we remember, okay? And if we read a thing, 10 days later, we might have captured 10% of what we've read, which is a terrifying statistic when we're talking about academia and how much we have to read. Hopefully we're better readers than that, right? Hopefully you're like, yeah, I'm way above that. But I will go ahead and sort of move ourselves all the way down to here. So this idea of active learning, right? If we are performing a play, or simulating a real experience, or building with our hands, which falls in this idea of create and evaluate, right? 90% of what we say and do, we retain, right? So if we are pretending, if we're having these experiences, like I can remember a lot of these things. I hope that as we're talking about this, you were also like, there are other times in your childhood that you are remembering as well. Things like, oh yeah, that's what I did used to do that. And this is how it would go. And I'd have that bossy cousin who would always make us do the thing, yeah? There is something to be said that it's fun. Playing pretend is fun. It's a great way to just spend time. But also, like remembering this can be really helpful in ways that we end up engaging one another. So I'm going to turn to one of my favorite things that I ever did in undergrad when I was at MTSU. So I had a professor named Dr. Yetta Halliday. She was over in the theater department, and she retired a few years ago. And she was my mentor when I was here in undergrad. And she taught me creative drama. What I mean by that is that theater can be a teaching tool. That it's not just a play that you can put on and people can come see, and not that you don't learn from that. There's a lot to be learned by going to see plays and working on plays. But outside of a theater setting, theater, drama, can be a really effective way to learn something. And not just learn it, but understand it. So one of the things that I got to do with her is that we would partner with classrooms, usually over at Bradley Elementary in Murfreesboro. And she had a couple of different creative dramas. And we would go into the classroom and spend a week. And in that week, we would essentially create a scenario. We would provide given circumstances for the elementary school students. And then Yetta would, usually when she tied on her bandana, that was the cue that she was in character, she would lead us through an adventure over the week. She'd lead the kids, and we would help her. And we would spend a whole week playing pretend in these classrooms. And the thing we would pretend was very much attached to curriculum. But because the students got to be characters in this drama, right, it didn't feel like we were having class. We were playing pretend for a week. One of my favorite ones with her was we did like an Oregon Trail, right, like a real life Oregon Trail, where the students, they all got assigned characters, they all figured out, where they were from, who their family was, what the items were that they got to take with them. Every day, much like the Oregon Trail computer game, there would be some sort of like new thing that we would have to figure out as a group, right? Somebody got sick, would we take the time to care for them? It was elementary school, so we rarely, nobody died from dysentery or anything like that. But we would have to sort of navigate as a group our journey, right, westward. It was fantastic. The students were so engaged and energized. And this curriculum that they were going to be learning anyway, the fact that they got to live it, meant that experience was internalized rather than just a thing that they had heard about and sort of passively been introduced to. So this idea of, I want to say this right, can I? Learning about something versus learning within something, right? So when we got to do a creative drama, you were learning within the structure as opposed to learning about a thing. I took this idea and actually applied it then to a high school class where we were studying the Industrial Revolution. We actually set up a factory in class. So over the week, there were folks who worked at the factory. We had the guy who owned the factory, right? And the factory owner decided that like he would like to increase productivity, which meant that he started to insist that the workers, you know, were able to produce a little more every day. Maybe you should come in earlier. Maybe we're going to take away the breaks, right? So we're like applying the pressure. And then at some point, the students decided to organize and go on strike. And this all just sort of came out of like providing the right given circumstances and then letting them figure out like at what point was the breaking point for them. At what point were they like, enough. You can do it yourself if that's what you want to do. And so we spent a week doing this. And again, like they're not learning about the thing, they were learning within it. So that idea of playing pretend, of assuming a character, of figuring out your given circumstances, makes it meaningful because it's like, I mean, we're having to make those choices as the people that are there. So I think that this idea of playing pretend has a lot of different applications. It is valuable in and unto itself, but it can also help in lots of other situations. And school is a great place for that. It is much more fun for me as a teacher to do it that way. And I think it's certainly much more fun for students when they have a chance to work within the thing. And playing pretend, let me tell you, like seeing their teachers take on a character is so fun, right? When you're like, I'm going to lead the Oregon Trail. Or if the teacher is the boss, right? When the students get to revolt against their teacher because they have, you know, it's great fun. All right. Let's see. In that way. Here we go. What's next? Okay. So, of course, the question then becomes like, is playing pretend just for kids? Let me ask you, where do you pretend now? Yeah?
Creatively,
Yeah.
definitely, because I'm working on like making a comic, and I do a lot of like creative writing,
Okay.
like as a hobby. So definitely like making these stories and stuff and kind of putting myself in the story and like making these different character arcs and kind of like, oh, what would I do in these scenarios? And definitely like daydreaming about it. I'm like so like in the storyline and stuff.
Sure.
So it's definitely something that I'm like, you know, pretending.
You're imagining the worlds, you're figuring out the characters and what they'd say to one another, and you're getting them in and out of situations and all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I love to pretend that I'm a K-pop idol on my debut stage when I'm listening to music.
Where is your debut stage?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Like, is it in your room? Is it your, yeah?
It's usually.
Okay.
And I just pretend that there's like a huge crowd of people and they're all in love with me.
I love it. You have choreography?
Sometimes.
Okay, great. A microphone?
Yes.
Okay, which is really a what?
My TV remote.
Okay, great. All right. Yes, you gotta have the props. That's really important, I think. Yeah.
As of now, I'm about to play D&D for the first time. So
Yes, I played D&D
basically,
too. Yeah, I forgot about that.
The campaign is still in works, but creating my own character, going through the spell list and everything, it's an experience for me. It's my first time. I'm like, wow, I love this. Coming up with the background.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. That is, yeah.
I can't believe I forgot.
Yes,
about that.
yes.
That's
I was waiting
Yeah.
to see how long it took for us to get to that. Yes. Yes.
Oh, I'm an overthinker, so I like in my head reenact things that happened in the past, but I change them to make myself look a little bit better.
Oh, nice. All right.
So,
Yes. I love that. Retell the story and yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody play out pretend the thing that's gonna happen?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you have those conversations?
Like
that you-
conversations over and over
Yes,
again.
yes, yes. I mean, that's definitely in the world of my head. It has not happened yet. I'm definitely putting myself there. Yes.
Like first, okay, I have two.
Mm-hmm.
So when you play like games, often you do have to like become a character.
Okay. Can you give me an example of what you mean by games?
I don't know, like when like you put yourself, for example, if anyone's played like Minecraft,
Okay.
right? Like suddenly you're fighting, and it all feels so real. Like you're fighting mobs, whatever. Second, when me and my friends have bits,
Mm-hmm.
and like we're like, we like suddenly like are just like really passive aggressive, like as a bit, but like we have different names
Okay.
in that circumstance.
Yeah.
So that we know that it's like just like a joke. and not like real, but like
And you guys you've been doing it so long that you just go along with it, and
yeah,
it's
like
just,
it's
yeah.
kind of like natural. Like something will happen, and we'll just be like, I don't like how you said that, and like roll our eyes,
I love that.
stuff like that.
Yes.
For mine, it would be every now and then the Renaissance Fair will come in town.
Yeah. Ren Fair? Anyone?
Oh
Ren
yeah,
Fair?
big
Yes,
time.
okay, great.
I
Ren
wear
Fair,
elf
yes.
heels all the time.
And
Elf
I have
ears.
this little like dragon skull creature that I've made. And it is technically a cosplay of the character that I
Sure.
designed. But because of it being a character that I do cosplay as, I kind of take on her persona,
Yeah.
which is definitely a little more Valka from How I Trained Your Dragon inspired.
Okay.
But,
Sure.
Yeah, so the movement's very similar to her.
Cosplay? Anyone in here cosplay? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. That's it. Yes.
I make up scenarios of the worst thing possible in my head.
Okay. And then do you figure out how to get out of them, or you just sit in them?
Any scenarios, I come up with solutions of how I protect myself, or how I will protect myself if it does happen in real life. It's not a good thing, but that's my form of pretending. It's really stressful, though.
It feels that way. I mean, there's nothing that says that playing pretend has to be like easy, right? And honestly, sometimes well, we'll talk about, but yes, I mean, that's, usually we think of it as fun, but also if you pretend these things, you can sort of, you're having your brain sort of
It's
think
based
through them.
off stuff that's gonna happen to me like in real life.
Whew. All right.
It's really is.
I hope that you can find some balance and enjoy some other, like, can you bring some other things into that pretend world too
I
sometimes?
don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, now I'm going to think about that. Okay, yes.
So I was thinking that everyone in our like adult society plays pretend, right?
I mean,
How are
yes.
you? I'm fine.
Yes.
And then like your grandma died last week, and you're like, yeah, it's cool. We're just not gonna talk about it. That's fine. We're
Yes.
all playing pretend with that. But I'm also thinking of how we play pretend as adults, and we rely on frameworks a lot more than we did in childhood. And it's probably just because we're comfortable, because we know how to interact within that framework. We are allowed to be vulnerable within the parameters of that framework. Because as children, everyone we interact with, we're allowed to be vulnerable with. We're allowed to say, no, I'm not okay, and you're allowed to be emotional.
I hurt,
So-
I'm crying.
Right, so that's
Yes.
what I'm thinking as I'm listening to everyone. I'm listening to all these frameworks we're interacting with. Whereas children were reacting more on spontaneity. You know, nobody really has a job. We're not worried about those kinds of things.
Yes. Even improv, right? So like in the world of theater, this idea of improv, right? Where you're making it up as you go. But the truth is that the best improvs have structure. I don't know if any of you have any experience in improv or doing improv, yes, but if you were to say to someone, come improvise a scene, go, without any other parameters, it's paralyzing. Like I do theater for a living, and if you're like, okay, Kate, improvise, like, about what? For how long? With who? Like I need some structure. Within structure, actually, it's pretty freeing once you're like, okay, here are the parameters, and now go, then cool. But like when every choice is a choice, as a grown-up, that is paralyzing. Somehow as a kid, it's not. And I don't know the answer to why that is. I'm just echoing that I hear what you're saying and find that to be true in my own life too. Yes, our friend behind.
I think that's interesting bringing up that as adults we're pretending every day, because it kind of reminds me of like as we get older, a lot of us develop this natural method of like I don't remember what it's called, like code switching, or I don't know if that's the right phrase. It's like when we're in a different group or with different people, where like we use different language, or we'll kind of try to conform to our given situation.
Yes, absolutely. I speak differently to my family at my house than I do to my friends, than I do to my parents, than I do to my students. Yeah. Yes. Here and then here. Yeah.
Also, just like another way, I feel like a lot of people, at least that I know, play pretend is we just like lie for fun.
Lie for fun!
Yeah, no, because like I'll be at work and me and my coworker will be like, oh yeah, we're identical twins. And then people look up at us and it's like, and just like fake accents. Like we love just messing with customers and like telling them lies that aren't like dangerous but are like ridiculous.
Did anybody else try out accents when they were kids?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%, yes. And like I was convinced I had the best British accent and I would just use it. And my mother was never so mortified than me, like, she doesn't really talk like that. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is not And then, yeah, and then there she is. That's so funny, accents, I'd forgotten about that. I love that. Yes, what were you gonna say?
On code switching, I saw a funny like YouTube short where somebody was interviewing people and trying to get them to do funny, spontaneous things, and they said, "Give me the voice you speak to your dog in." And I was like, that is like the best example of drastic code switching that we're very uncomfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Like with my
I'm not
cat.
gonna ever talk to someone like I talk to my dog.
Yeah.
But I will talk to my dog like I talk to him every time.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
But you think about like the specific voice you use to talk to your dog. If you have a dog, sorry.
I don't, but I can think of the voice that I use when my son can't find his shoes and we have to leave, right? I would not speak to any of you in that way. And I love this child. I would give my life for him. But when he can't find his shoes in the morning, there's a mom voice that like leaps out of me that I didn't even know I had cultivated, but it's there. When
My
you can't
mother-
find your shoes.
She calls it her prison voice.
Oh, your mom? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Okay.
my mom. She's a criminal psychologist in a men's prison, and
she would know.
She says, "Don't make me use my prison voice, because I will."
Oh my goodness.
Or the Southern comes out of her.
Yes, no, that happens.
I grew up in California, but my mom's Southern.
Uh-huh.
So all of a sudden, her Southern accent comes out when we're misbehaving. She's
Yes.
like,
Listen, don't get into like when I flip into my Southern accent, it's almost always when I need to soften the blow or when I feel like, I mean, that like, I think there's something that's there. Or if I need to feel somehow less like, I don't know, authoritative, I'll slip into like Southern and then like I'm so much more agreeable and then I can convince you to do a thing because I've added the lilt to my voice. Yes, okay.
On the accent thing, the first and last time I will ever do that, I was like a teenager, and of course the one to like my friends and I were all like having a resurgence of watching the show H2O, and the one time I like we were like joking around in a public setting, I like spoke to somebody in an Australian accent. He was Australian, so I was caught pretty quickly. We'll never do that again.
Yes. Okay, well these are great, but I'm also very much like I have 5 minutes. So here's what I want to say about this. Other places where we find pretend that actually becomes incredibly useful as I don't know, we'll just say grown-ups, okay? This was a thing that I did not know existed for a long time, and it's actually a great way of using, like for my acting students who were going out and like starting careers and trying to figure out how else their skills apply. Does anybody know what standardized patients are? Anybody heard this term? So imagine that your doctor, when you go see your doctor, like they were students and then they were doctors. And you hope that the first time that they've talked to an actual live person is not the first time they come in to diagnose somebody the first day of work, right? You want them to have practiced that. So there is actually a job called standardized patient where we say, all right, your job today is to imagine that you are Laura. And Laura is experiencing these symptoms, and Laura's been experiencing from this amount of time, and Laura is from this kind of, this background. Laura has a family. Laura has all of these given circumstances, and then your job is to go into a doctor's office where the practicing doctor will come in, and they will ask you questions and interact with you, where the doctor gets a chance to practice what it is to have a dialogue with somebody who they're trying to find out what the thing is, right? Standardized patients. Thank goodness, right? Like I'm really glad that exists, not just because I want my actors to have jobs, but because I go to doctors and I want them to know how to talk to me and ask me questions about this. That idea of playing pretend in that situation actually has some real implications about the kind of healthcare that you are going to get. You hope that the standardized patient pool is made up of a lot of different people because you want your doctors to be familiar with talking to a lot of different people. But that is playing pretend. That has some real implications. Yeah.
Do they ask for people to specifically come in and use this kind of very strong accent that's a little hard to decipher, or be a little more stubborn, or be less revealing about your information?
They do. They give you some. Yes. It's not just here are the details and you come in and you're like, this is how I feel. I have a headache. I've had it for 4 days. You're like, yes. maybe this is the third time you've been to see a doctor about this particular thing, and so maybe you are particularly frustrated because you don't feel like anybody's listening to you, and now that is the given circumstance that I've got to figure out. So yes, it's not just the list of details, it's about the way you present them as well. Because yeah, that's part of it, right? Like, how much do I really want to tell you? I just met you. You got to be good at it real fast. Yeah. There are some other professions who think that this is helpful too. There's actually a lot of corporate training where they realize if they want to be successful, they need employees who know how to talk to people. And so there's actually a lot of training where you send people in to pretend like they are your customers, and so that you can talk to them. My husband is in hotels, and he finds it incredibly helpful when he can have his front desk agents train with like just having the conversation with people. Let's play pretend. I'm here on vacation with my 5 kids, and we've been exhausted, and now you tell us that we don't have the right kind of room type. How are you going to handle that? There's also, like, the same thing happens with lawyers. Actually, there's quite a bit of acting training that is available to lawyers who need to know how to question somebody and to earn somebody's trust and to how to present their case, right? So there's this sort of idea of playing pretend in a lot of these areas that are not nearly as fun as cosplay and D&D and all of these other things, but are also pretty beneficial, and I'm glad that they exist because I need these people to be good at what they do. And playing pretend is a really good way for that to happen. Okay. Also, and let's just not forget, that theater is great for playing pretend, and that's me playing Imogene Herdman in the best Christmas pageant ever, which was actually very eye-opening for me. Has anybody seen or read the best Christmas pageant ever? Okay. The Herdmans were the worst kids in the whole history of the world. They lied, stole, smoked cigars, even the girls. Yes, okay. And set fire to Fred Shoemaker's old broken down tool shed. I probably can do the whole thing. I was in the play 4 different times. Once as Imogene Herdman, twice as Mrs. Armstrong, and then once, my senior year, I got to play Grace Bradley, the mom. And it was a really big deal. But this is a whole play about like these Herdman kids who are poor, who have a terrible reputation, and who are absolutely looked down upon by the rest of the community, particularly this church, right? The goody two-shoes is always going to be Mary, but because Imogene Herdman threatens this child, she gets to be Mary. And she learns a thing, not necessarily about religion, but just about like, I don't know, quietness and peace. And everybody else learns something too, that you can't judge a book by their cover. There is something to be said for asking a young person to play a role that has nothing to do with them. To ask them to stand in somebody else's shoes in their circumstances and to say the words, interact with people, because that's what the dialogue says, and to see the world from somebody else's vantage point. Theater does this beautifully. So yes, playing pretend. I've been playing pretend all my life. I do it over in the theater department. There's a great little play that's happening right now called Tomato Plant Girl, and if you have a young person in your life, you should take them. It's 45 minutes. It's delightful. It's happening this coming weekend. I appreciate your sharing with me today about all the kinds of things that you think about when you're playing pretend, and if you're ever in the theater department, come see me. All right. Ta-da!